Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Garrison Keillor, and I came across a brilliant document that he put together on Twitter and downloaded it. And the title of the document, the working title, is just the Sirhan Sirhan timeline. And Sirhan Sirhan is the alleged assassin of Robert F. Kennedy in 1968 at the Ambassador Hotel. And I say alleged because the real shot that murdered or ended the life of Robert F. Kennedy came from behind. Actually, Noguchi, who was the medical examiner, said it was a shot within a foot from the back of his head. And Sirhan was nowhere close to that. He was obviously seen by tens of people in front of RFK with a gun shooting randomly. And there were more shots. And I've done interviews, and I suggest people go back and listen to those on two excellent books. I highly recommend those and the authors. And one is A Lie Too Big to Fail, The Real History of the Assassination of Robert F. Kennedy by Lisa Peace. And then also Tim Tate, who I've talked about on a number of subjects, but we covered the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, Crime, Conspiracy, and Cover Up, a New Investigation. And both of those are very well-read, popular books on the subject. I think justly popular. They're excellent books and very detailed. But there's information in this Sirhan Sirhan timeline. I like the angle that Jim took on this is from his perspective alone, and not so much like who was this strange character, Sirhan Sirhan? I believe he's a strange character, and what are his connections? And I think he asks those questions right at the intro to the document, which is a public source document. It's available for review, and I suggest people are interested in this topic, check it out. But I'm delighted to have him on the show. So Jim Garrison Keillor, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Cool, man. So for people who may not know of you on social media or what you write or what you research, maybe you can just talk a little bit about your background, how you became interested in the RFK Sirhan Sirhan subject and led you to put together this amazing document, the Sirhan Sirhan timeline.
Yeah, so I started by researching the JFK assassination years ago and reading. And then I eventually saw that JFK and RFK were kind of part of one of the same phenomenon that needed to be eliminated. And because their policies were so similar to one another, and I started seeing that a Bobby Kennedy administration had to be prevented. And then really when I read Lisa Peace's book, I saw that there was no way that Sirhan could have killed Bobby Kennedy. It was just impossible. And then I started the timeline because I wanted to know what was Sirhan doing, this man who was convicted and is still in prison for this murder. What was he doing? Where was he? Who was he with? And what happened to him psychologically that led to him being at the Ambassador Hotel that night in 1968? So yeah, I've been posting. I posted this document on my Twitter. The other things I post about or do research about are just 9/11, the JFK assassination, some of the other events, Jonestown, other things of that nature. I've had some pretty long threads on that, but this is the first real document of this kind that I've posted.
Yeah, and it's very well researched. It goes 50 pages, but different angles too. Like you really go into his background in detail and his interest in Rosicrucianism and where he worked. Maybe you can just, like, for people who may not be as familiar with the story, who was Sirhan Sirhan and what is his background?
Well, he is from a Jordanian family that was living in Jerusalem, and that's where he was born. They were a Christian Jordanian family, and he was born there in 1944. And anyone who's familiar with the history of Israel and the Nakba and the Arab-Israeli War, in 1947, basically he and his family are removed violently from their homes, and they're in a war zone until 1956 when they emigrate to America. And I would argue in this timeline that we cannot understand Sirhan until we understand the trauma that he experienced as a child growing up in Jerusalem. And we can't understand him psychologically or politically until we understand these formative experiences. And they're truly grotesque and gruesome. These violent experiences that he has and the things that he witnesses. So it really explains a lot. And so, yeah, that's kind of his origins. Yeah.
Right. So he's in Jerusalem. He flees the country or whatever, expelled. There's
Mhm.
violence. There wells are poisoned, body parts, people dying. So at a
Mhm.
very early age, he's exposed to a lot of kind of a harsh environment. He gets out, makes it to the States as a refugee. His family does, and they all settle somewhere in the greater Los Angeles area, right? Pasadena.
Yeah. So around 1956, they come to America and they end up in Pasadena. His father stays in New York for some years and finally goes back to Israel in 1966. And so he's really living with his two brothers, Adel and Munir, and his sister Aida, and his mother in Pasadena. So his father's not part of the picture. And that's where he lives until 1968.
And he's kind of a smaller figure, right? He's not
Mhm.
a big person, so he tries to find jobs in that, and that kind of what led him to horses and working around horses.
Yeah, I mean, he goes to junior high school and high school in Pasadena. One interesting thing is in high school, he was part of this California Cadet Corps program. It was like a 3-year military science course. So that involved range practice, kind of basic training. I would say that's maybe where he gets his interest in guns. Um, but we don't know. And then he ends up at Pasadena City College, or PCC, and he really does terribly. I mean, he's getting D's and F's and C's, and yeah, he just has odd jobs around Pasadena. He's working as a gardener at a gas station. He can't really keep a job for very long. Um,
Yeah, he worked for Von Karman, which is really something else. So it's a tie-in to the
oh,
whole JPL thing, right?
oh yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't look that deeply into that, and that's kind of why I'm looking for crowdsourcing. Like, if anyone recognizes these names and has more, a deeper dive into who these people are. Yeah, he was a gardener for that guy, Theodore von Karman.
Yeah. So Von Karman was like with JPL. I think they even got or something about him, like they got some kind of Carmen name after is named after that guy. But yeah, he was that. I mean, that's there. Pasadena is JPL, right? So it's right there,
Yeah, right,
right around that
right,
time.
right there. And Caltech is right next to Pasadena City College as well.
Yep.
So yeah, he works at a couple of gas stations. He's taking a couple classes. He just gets D's and C's on everything. And then his sister dies in March of 1965 of leukemia. At this point, I'm trying to figure out where he was. And at this point, his mother says he was away from the home for quite some time after her death. So she believes he was living with a group of boys and girls somewhere in Pasadena. We don't know. So anything could have happened to him. He could have been with any kind of people. And yeah, 65 was not a very eventful year for him until in October of that year, he gets a job working at the Santa Anita racetrack in Arcadia.
Right. So that area would be kind of east from downtown LA. And a
Yeah.
lot of people may not realize it, but so certain parts around there, Corona, Norco, are literal horse country. There's a lot of horses, just like people on horseback and things
Yeah.
like that. So he was in that environment. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really the middle, like the summer of 66 when so October of 65, he clearly begins his kind of begin whatever, if you want to call it a career, or his interest, his jobs working in the horse racing industry. And then, he's never really very good at working with animals. Anyone who has worked with him or hired him pretty much says he lost his temper a lot. People didn't like him. He got into arguments about Israel and talked angrily about Jews. But nevertheless, he's kind of serious about trying to make it as probably a jockey at some point. So he gets his hot walkers license, and he doesn't last very long at the Santa Anita racetrack. By March of 66, he quits. And then, yeah, like you said, in the middle of 66, May, he gets a job, May or June, he gets a job at this ranch in Norco. And anyone who doesn't know Southern California, it's kind of in the Inland Empire, about an hour away from Pasadena. And it was right next door to Desi Arnaz's ranch. He had a well-known ranch where I think he just trained racehorses, but Sirhan worked right next to it for a guy named Bert Altfillish. And Norco to this day, like you said, is a horse town. You go down there and there are hitching stations out in front of every store. There's all the sidewalks are dirt sidewalks, and so you can ride your horse everywhere, and they're just horse ranches all over the place.
Yeah, it's a cool little city, and Corona's kind of like that too. But and he also develops around that time, 2 years before the assassination, an interest in occultism. I mean, it really is the truth. Like, he became interested in the ancient mystical order of the Rosicrucians and occult books. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so that's a kind of a rabbit hole I went into in this timeline, because I started looking at it, and it was just the fishiest situation, because it's really all about kind of their teachings are all about kind of self-development, self-improvement, mastery over yourself, mastery over others by using ancient occult knowledge. So what I've noticed is just that he doesn't really, what it is it's a correspondence course. So he wasn't heavily involved socially in this group. They had just started a correspondence course, I guess, where you send away for materials, you send in your payment, and they send you materials that you work on, and then you send it back, and someone from their main headquarters in San Jose, I guess, is supposed to work closely with you and kind of monitor your progress and correspond with you. But he goes to a meeting at the end of May in 66 in their lodge in Pasadena, where his name is signed in the guest register. And then, as far as I can tell, so this is the beginning of what I would call his transformation, where he starts this downward spiral. And then I would say there's a bookend where about a week before the assassination, he goes to another meeting at another Rosicrucius meeting in Pasadena. And both times they do these similar kind of things on him, where he's blindfolded and told to identify objects just by touching them. And so the whole thing is so mysterious. And also, I did find, if anyone's interested, there's an author named Pierre Freeman. He was in the Rosicrucian Society for like 24 years. He wrote a couple of exposés, a couple of books on their whole system, and he says it's just a cult, hands down. It's a really fraudulent, dangerous cult that brainwashes its members. And so I really was fascinated by that. The only issue for me is that he wasn't really, just being a correspondence course, I don't see how that could be responsible. If he was programmed, I don't see how that could be the one source of his programming. But we do see that up until the assassination, he is pretty much involved in this these occult teachings, and he's definitely a very intent on developing whatever skills he thinks he can.
Right. I mean, and he writes it in his notes. He's talking. There's a word Illuminati. So there's some kind of thing, but also these occults, they kind of overlap with a lot of this. But he believed in mind control. So it really it's interesting. So he's in this environment where they're supposedly teaching him, but what if he's supposedly being taught? But what if the opposite takes place? Is the guy who's teaching him is actually trying to put him together, or is at least thinking about that? And we don't know those connections. Maybe somebody else does or secretly does. But the fact that the Amorc is talking about getting somebody to do something for you without them knowing is really remarkable, because that's like the whole idea of the MK Ultra hypnotism, which is also taking place around the time leading up to the murders, right, in the 60s.
Yeah. So what he's supposed to be learning how to do ends up happening to him.
Right. That's just like the real irony.
Yeah. And I would say, at this time, middle of the summer of 66, he gets into the Amorc, And then he starts his automatic writing in his infamous notebook. And it's shortly after this that he has this catastrophic accident while he's riding a horse at Bert Altfilish's ranch. So all of these things happen right away. His earliest writings in this notebook, which he really won't remember very much at all during the trial, they refer to people he meets in the summer of '66 when he starts this job at Bert Altfilish's ranch. So this was right after days after he first joined the Rosicrucian Society, that he starts this job and starts this notebook. And I have to imagine that he was learning these techniques and thinking, oh, I'm going to start writing down things, but we can't account for the fact that he doesn't remember it.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you're watching on YouTube, this is like a recent thing from his most recent attempt to get out of jail. He doesn't remember killing RFK. So he has memory problems that are starting to show around 66 and 68 that didn't seem to be as prevalent before this so-called horse accident, which we know something happened, but there's arguments that like you cite Brown, I think was the doctor who said that all could have been set up, right?
Yeah. So Dr. Daniel Brown, he was a Harvard psychologist who was hired by Sirhan's defense team in about 2008. And he spent 3 years talking to Sirhan, analyzing him, discussing his mental state. And what I need to stress is that Brown definitively said Sirhan does not have either dissociative identity disorder or paranoid schizophrenia. He's not someone who is, if anyone's read Wendy Painting's Aberration in the Heartland of the Real, I keep thinking about that because she shows Timothy McVeigh as very clearly demonstrating dissociative issues, dissociative identity disorder, where he is kind of creating multiple narratives about his life that contradict each other and telling different people these different narratives at different times. Sirhan never does that. And Dr. Daniel Brown says obviously no one can hypnotize themselves and then forget about doing it. So this is part of his psychological, the thing we have to understand about Sirhan. He just doesn't remember these events. Falling from the horse in, I think, September of that year. He doesn't remember it. Writing all of that stuff in his notebook, he doesn't remember it. Shooting at RFK or how he got into the pantry, he doesn't remember. But he remembers many other parts of his life quite well. So,
right, yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah.
And then the 2-week disappearance of him in hospitals, and he's constantly going into hospitals. Like, it's very suspicious, right?
Yeah. So he falls off this horse and he injures his left eye. He doesn't have any neurological damage. All the doctors' reports say no neurological damage. Months after the injury, it's stitched up and everything. The injury is like getting worse somehow. And he keeps going to doctors for over a year, like maybe 15 or 16 months after this fall. And there are doctors in Corona, Norco area, and then there's doctors in Pasadena. I mean, it was not a very serious injury. And so it's very fishy. What was he doing with all those doctors? I tried so hard to link any of them back to any of these CIA, like the MK Search or MK Ultra or any CIA sponsored programs, but for the life of me, I can't, but it's really weird how many times he went to the doctor for over a year after this accident.
Right. He's just constantly going into the care or whatever. Like, and it's not really clear. Like, his family doesn't seem to know too. There's like just odd things. Like, if I have family members in the hospital, I know that they're there and when they got out and what happened. I just it's suspicious. Yeah. So
Dr. Brown said that Sirhan was missing for 2 weeks and he was in hospitals for this kind of haze. And but then we see some people at the ranch, Bert Altfilish's ranch, who say, oh yeah, we saw him here the next day. And then some people that say, oh, he came back to work 6 days later. and so we can't quite be sure of what did happen. And then after that, he falls on at least 3 more occasions off of horses at other ranches. So
Right.
his physical coordination is awful. Like, he goes to work at Del Mar racetrack in, I think, December of that year. He falls off a horse. And then the next year he goes to work at Santa Anita again. He falls off a horse. And all of his friends and family say he was not the same after this fall. He was depressed. He gave up on his dreams of being a jockey. He said he became obsessed with this kind of $2,000 workers' comp payout that he thought he was going to get. And
Right, which he did eventually get a payout, right? He got paid off.
Yeah, about a year later. And then I'm just wondering, I think the theory has been floated that that was somehow told to him as some reason to do the fall in the first place. Like, the theory that he was programmed to fall from that horse because he would get this big financial payout. But yeah,
right. And 66 is when he starts getting an interest in guns and starts going to the range too. So there's like some kind of personality change where he's becoming, and he's seen shooting his weapon. Well, I forgot the name of the weapon or what kind of gun it was.
Oh yeah, I forget the name of the pistol. But yeah, it's this profound transformation that happens to him. Another weird, kind of almost a poignant element to his experience in Norco is that he lived with this guy Edward Van Antwerp, who was his roommate. He met him at a cafe and they became roommates. And he was Edward Van Antwerp was an alcoholic, and Sirhan would take care of him a lot. He took him to AA meetings. And the weirdest thing is, the day of the assassination, Van Antwerp hadn't lived with Sirhan for at least a year and a half or something. But on the day of the assassination, Antwerp disappeared and showed up a couple months later in Northern California. He didn't even tell his own wife where he was going. But Sirhan seems to have had this friendship with Antwerp. And one thing that I should just mention is, because I live in Southern California and I drove out to Norco. I've driven out there a couple of times, and I looked at the location where he lived, where Sirhan and Antwerp lived, and it's right over the hill. I mean, I'm talking a 5-minute walk from a naval base. And this is called Naval Sea Systems Command. And at that time in the 60s, it was attached to a place called the California Rehabilitation Center. That place is still there. It's just a prison now. But in the 60s, the California Rehabilitation Center was a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center. So this was right over the hill from where Sirhan lived with Antwerp. So yeah, it's very strange.
Very strange, odd things about Sirhan. And one of the things I learned that I didn't know and don't recall from the other books I read is the stalking of Kennedy. Right, he's driving weird places and is seen at stops at Kennedy, who, California is very important, right? He's seen in different spots.
Yeah, so once Kennedy announces his candidacy, I believe March of 68, Sirhan has bought his revolver. So January of 1968, for some reason, Sirhan becomes obsessed with buying a gun. And then he gets this .22 revolver. It's a pistol that his brother's coworker sells to him. We don't know why he buys this. He doesn't really have any adequate explanation. And then so Kennedy announces his candidacy in March 16th. Yeah, that's the date. And so then at that point, Sirhan gradually becomes obsessed with Kennedy. And when Kennedy is campaigning in California, Sirhan starts being seen at Kennedy campaign events, in addition to the fact that he's being seen at shooting ranges. And so multiple people see Sirhan shooting at different shooting ranges in San Gabriel or Corona. Several people see him with other individuals, a man and a woman. He's seen at a gun shop called Lock, Stock, and Barrel at Pasadena with other people, with 2 men who looked Arabic, and The owners of the store don't identify his two brothers as those men. So who were those men? He's seen at a restaurant where Kennedy was giving a speech with a woman. He's seen where else? Oh, at Kennedy headquarters with this guy Khaybar Khan and at least one more Arabic guy. Khaybar Khan was a flashy Iranian businessman who was volunteering for Kennedy's campaign. And this guy Khaybar Khan was hated by the Johnson administration because he had sued the Shah of Iran. And he hated the Shah of Iran. He hated Johnson's cozy relationship with the Shah. And so some people saw Sirhan with Khaybar Khan and at least one other Arabic man. Khaybar Khan says, no, I saw Sirhan at Kennedy headquarters with someone else. I don't know him. Khan is an interesting character because he was getting a lot of local Arabic people that he knew somehow from the LA region to volunteer for the Kennedy campaign. So, so he's seen with multiple people seeming to stalk Kennedy. And
right.
Yeah, and then it comes down to the whole issue of like what made him want.
Right. What's his motivation, right?
Yeah.
And I guess the press went with his anti-Israel views is why he did it, but he didn't seem to have like a real animus until a certain point, right? Recorded animus against Kennedy, right?
Yeah, this is the problem. So the prosecution kept saying, okay, Sirhan was enraged by the fact that Bobby Kennedy made a campaign promise that he was going to go ahead and with this plan that Johnson already had to sell Israel these 50 Phantom jets. And this is after the 6-Day War of 1967. So we have to remember this war enrages Sirhan. It devastates him. He's watching his childhood play out again. So he's full of rage. And this was Johnson's plan to sell these Phantom jets to Israel. Bobby Kennedy just made a promise that he would uphold that. But we don't find any evidence that Sirhan ever was angered by that before the assassination. I didn't find any time where he mentioned that to anyone. He talks to his trash collector on, I think April of that year of 68. He says, "Oh, I'm going to kill Kennedy, or I'm going to kill the SOB." So his trash collector remembers having this conversation. But this is before this TV show was aired, where apparently Sirhan was supposed to have seen a biography of Bobby Kennedy where Bobby Kennedy mentioned selling those Phantom jets. But then there's not evidence that we're not sure if that TV show even mentioned that. I couldn't find a copy of whatever that was. But so basically the bottom line, what I'm getting at is we don't have any connection between the Kennedy promising to sell those jets to Israel, and Sirhan deciding that he hates Kennedy. So it's not, the link isn't there. The causal link isn't there, I guess.
And even the lead up, I think he was shot June 4th, 1968. The lead up of Sirhan is very strange. Like the people he's missing for pieces of time. People are around him, even at the Ambassador, which is now torn down in his high school. Yeah. But there's people surrounding him. There's the infamous woman with the polka dot dress, right?
Oh yeah, there's so many people see her that night, and I think even talking to Daniel Brown over those 3 years, he remembers her kind of flirting with him, and that's territory that Lisa Pease really gets deeply into in her book. And so for me, that's kind of the background to why it matters what Sirhan was doing for these couple of years, and why it matters what happened to him psychologically, because that night, just the forensics details don't add up Lisa, I think, says he wasn't even firing any bullets. He was firing blanks. And,
Wow.
clearly he was shot from behind. And I think the major theory is Thane Eugene Caesar was the one who did the shooting. But yeah, the whole night is going to be just a complete mystery to Sirhan himself. And what I want to get at is that we don't have any evidence of Sirhan consciously choosing to shoot Kennedy. Okay. And or even coming to any conscious decision that he hates Kennedy. And that is, to me, what suggests someone behind the scenes manipulating him, because he's not dissociative. He doesn't have paranoid schizophrenia. And so he also doesn't consciously choose to kill Kennedy. And the idea that he hates them is very tenuous, because we know from his childhood he hated Zionism and anything connected to Israel's aggression. Kennedy was so tenuously connected to that, even in Sirhan's conscious mind, that we don't see at what point he wanted or why he would want to kill Kennedy. And he's writing it over and over in his notebook. Robert F. Kennedy must be assassinated. And he says on trial, in his trial transcripts, he says, I don't know, sir. I don't know why I wrote that. I must have. He remembers like emotions. That's key. He remembers emotions like, it lit me up, it burned me up, sir. But he doesn't remember ever making a choice. Like, oh, that's when I decided to kill Kennedy. He never says that.
Right. So it's just, he is it's just a strange guy. And like on the scale of hypnosis people, he is highly hypnotizable, right? Like,
yeah,
I think there's some kind of scale that they figured out early, even before World War II, about whether you can be hypnotized or not. And I think I was reading through, like you mentioned, this guy, Spiegel actually has a test. Like you can do a 1-minute test on a person to see how hypnotizable. Have you ever seen that?
Oh no, I haven't. But
yeah, no, maybe I can find it. But there's a test within hypnosis where if this person looks up and down and like follows, like there's a hole in their head, that's like a 1-minute test to see. So Sirhan was that, like he could go into another state super fast, right?
Yeah, and I did some research in this timeline of just the history of hypnosis and kind of the academic theories about hypnosis. And there's really two theories: is the state and the non-state theory that have emerged from the scholarship. And one is that you go into an altered state where you are dissociated, and the other is kind of that you don't go into an altered state, but you are still under hypnosis. Either one of those, those are the academics go back and forth on that, and either one of those can account for Sirhan. No, whatever your theory on hypnosis is, Sirhan's actions can be accounted for in terms of being hypnotized. He's very suggestible. And like, I just have to reiterate, he's not hypnotizing himself and then forgetting that he did it, so
right.
There's something else that happened to him.
Did you come across, I didn't see it in the timeline, have you ever heard the story of Radio Man? He was into like radio communications, right?
Sirhan?
Yeah.
I did not.
I've heard the story about him tinkering around with the two-wave radios, and that somebody might have been tinkering with him through a radio, which is hard to believe, giving him suggestions, and that's
interesting.
I'll send you my links on that. That might be a possibility. That's another. And one of the sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, that's what I'm looking for, is like where and who accessed him and how. And I might have something like that, because I have some recollections of his brother, because Sirhan lived at home for a year and a half before the assassination. So his brother was living there in and out of the house, and mentions Sirhan was in his room a lot doing these Rosicrucian, weird kind of Rosicrucian rituals. He might have mentioned a radio of some kind. It might be somewhere in my time.
I'll have to go back and look at that. It'll be an addition to this excellent timeline. But also there were CIA. I mean, there were MK Ultra doctors all over LA at that time. William Jennings Bryan Jr. West is around somewhere. So those are accessible. And I think West had some connection when he was at UCLA to some hospital out there in the
Oh
San
yeah.
Bernardino area. I got to look that up.
Yeah, Jolly West. I definitely was interested in him. I think he ends up at UCLA a couple years after the assassination. But yeah, that's another thing that I wanted to kind of crowdsource this, because there are other people out there who probably know more about who those doctors were around LA or what studies were being done at like UCLA or there was a lot, and that's just something I would love to add to the timeline. It would just be one of these digressions where I could go through and look at who were the CIA affiliated academics in the psychology departments. And I know UCLA had a department that was very heavily affiliated with the CIA.
I think it was William Turner and John Christian hypothesized in the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy that Bryan was responsible for inducing Sirhan Sirhan to fire blanks at Robert F. Kennedy with post-hypnotic suggestion. So they allege that it was him. And this guy was kind of a nasty character. He would hypnotize women and do, involved in Artichoke and MK Ultra.
I do go into a lot of the sub-projects of MK Ultra in the timeline just to show what they were capable of, what they were studying, and what some of these studies were attempting to do, because we see that it was totally under the umbrella of the MK programs. The idea of programming Sirhan was something they had been studying since the early 50s. And I think Lisa Pease says that it was Robert Mayhew. That's her kind of hypothesis, that he was in charge of the Sirhan op. And I don't know a ton about him. I would have to reread her book.
Yeah, I'd have to go. I want to go back with the information that you've compiled in this angle. Go back and look at Tate and Peace's book, just to get more information out of it. John asked, "Is there a recording of Jolly West interviewing Sirhan Sirhan under hypnosis? If so, do they know if he was also drugged for that interview? Do you know anything about that?"
No, I haven't heard anything. I would love to connect the two of them in some way, if there was any possibility. I think West where was he, in Nebraska, University of Nebraska at this time? Or
I think he was Oklahoma.
I
have to go back and look at his timeline too, but I think he was in Norman, Oklahoma.
Yeah, I would have killed to get him anywhere near Sirhan in those couple of years, but he was at the University of Oklahoma at this time. So that's my.
And the other tie-in of mind control into this whole thing, which you could probably expand upon if you wanted to, is the Frankenheimer connection to Kennedy and who John Frankenheimer was. So can you talk about that, or are you aware of that?
I remember writing that here. Kennedy was with John Frankenheimer, I think, the night of the assassination.
Frankenheimer drove him to the ambassador, but Frankenheimer was the director of the Manchurian Candidate. Like, you can't even write that.
There's that whole there's that whole thing, which I didn't get too much into Bobby Kennedy or his campaign and the people he was around. Although in the future I could, but that is crazy.
It's totally crazy. So Frankenheimer, and then it was Richard Condon, I think, wrote that. I actually just on my other show, the D-Hypno program, I did a reading about Condon because he wrote the intro to The Search for the Manchurian Candidate. He wrote a book about it and then was like writing about it, and then Frankenheimer shows up. I mean, it's incredible.
It's too crazy. And wasn't he also, I didn't put this anywhere, but wasn't Kennedy also hanging out with Roman Polanski and Jessica or Tate? I think
Tate? I wouldn't be surprised.
I think like the day before he had maybe had dinner with them.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's something I would have to look up, but I swear
because they were doomed for the next year, right? I mean, the 60s was so crazy, dude.
It was.
When you look at all this just manic murder and everything. Oh my gosh.
There's also Sirhan is hanging out with groups of Arabs who are pretty politically active. probably people he met at Pasadena City College. And these are like very pro, like pan-Arabic, Arab nationalist, anti-Zionist people. So we see that he has a big group of acquaintances, and especially very closely tied in with the Arab community around Los Angeles. And, these people are being monitored after the 6-Day War by the FBI. Another guy named Walter Crowe was Sirhan's friend from junior high school. Walter Crowe is basically a radical communist, and he was friends with an FBI informant named William DeVale. And DeVale wrote a memoir in 1970 where he talks about how Sirhan made revolutionary comments to Walter Crowe about waging war against the establishment. And so Crowe was being monitored by the FBI. And, there's this whole group of kind of anti-Zionist, pro-Arabic nationalist people, Communist Party people, and all of the schools around Los Angeles that were being monitored by the FBI. And Walter Crowe even felt guilty. He said that maybe I helped make Sirhan angry enough at the establishment that's why he wanted to go kill Kennedy, because we had these conversations where we were both talking about revolutionary ideas like, yeah, let's rise up against the establishment, man, and stuff like that. So there's the whole Walter Crowe
angle.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a lot of different angles there. Do you know who his best friend, Sirhan's best friend in jail was? It was Dan White, the guy who did the
no way
Moscone. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Is that crazy? Like they're friends. The Twinkie Defender. Buddies, and he might have. I don't know if he was like I don't know if there's mind control behind that guy, but he reminds me of acts like somebody who had like brain like CTE or whatever they call it.
Oh, that's a whole separate assassination to get into.
Yeah.
And the whole the politics of San Francisco and whatever happened to Dan White and the Twinkie defense. That's crazy. Funny that he was friends with Sirhan.
Yeah, they were the best buddies in jail wherever they were.
Well, I'm sure they on some level could relate to each other. I mean,
probably, yeah. That's a whole nother. I mean, there's a lot of weird tie-ins with all these guys, but I think looking over my research, Sirhan was a patsy, and Kennedy had to go, just like you said. Like they couldn't allow him into any power. Like once it became clear that he was the front runner, and Johnson dropped out, it's like,
yeah. And Bobby Kennedy Jr. has made it pretty clear that it was really expected that his father was going to win. So at that point, I mean, I can see how he had to be gotten rid of. And it just in terms of the direction of the Vietnam War and what Kennedy would have done, a second Kennedy administration, it would have been a repeat, probably policy-wise, of JFK.
Yeah.
And they couldn't have that.
Yeah, they couldn't have that. They couldn't have any investigations of JFK either. Like the brother's tied to his brother, right? So that's another thing. It's like, and there are similarities between Sirhan and Oswald. It's almost like they were prepped and then turned to the task. So like Oswald's whole background is like a legend about like he's been in Russia. They don't know anything. I mean, and then at a certain point, somebody in the higher up say, okay, Oswald's going to be our patsy. Let's start grooming him for this role, Project, was it Free Cuba Committee stuff, and getting him in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. I mean, you could see that they were being manipulated before their final purpose was decided. Oswald or Sirhan, if whatever happened to him happened 2 years to me, it happened 2 years before the assassination, there was any need for him,
Right. So like somebody was making him a Manchurian candidate for whatever. And then somebody said, okay, we got the guy in the right spot. And, we got the right people in place and we can just front load this and let's get him right there over there at the ambassador, wherever he was.
Yeah. And I think he was sent out to kind of go to various events during the campaign trail. That was probably they're just seeing if he is workable, if he's usable, can he accept direction or whatever, and can he be sent to this location and go where he's told. And they probably sense that, oh my God, this guy will do whatever we tell him to, and he doesn't really know what he's doing. He doesn't remember it. I mean, it was probably a remarkable find, because how many people are there like that?
Right. Like, so somebody had him figured out and understood his purpose, his usefulness, right?
Yeah, and why I go back so early into his childhood is because I maintain that whoever did this to him knew specifically his hatred of Zionism and managed to tweak it or kind of replace Kennedy, put him in the spot where, Sirhan had this rage built up towards Zionism, and someone very skillfully kind of converted that to Kennedy, or swapped Kennedy out, or swapped it out,
right,
and replaced Kennedy. And Sirhan still doesn't know how that happened. It's crazy.
It is crazy. And I think that there was some kind of connection between the racetrack, and there was some other guy there that was a mind control killer. I forgot his name, but there's some kind of weird connection. It's either Arthur Bremer or one of these other guys had some connection to Sirhan. I got to find that for you. But
one of I would love to put that in there.
Yeah, there's some kind of interesting things like that. But it's really a brilliant piece. I really am glad that you wrote it. Where can people find it?
Oh yeah, you can go to my Twitter page. I'm under Jim Garrison Keillor. It's at books_rum, and it's just right there in my profile. And you can just click on it's a Dropbox, and you can check it out. And I hope people enjoy and have something that they can add if there's anything.
Yeah, and if they have any critiques or additions, where can they send it to you? Just through Twitter is probably the best place?
Yeah, you can just tweet at me or DM me, or if I've gotten anything wrong, by all means, I would love to correct it. So
and then also you said you did some other threads too, 9/11 and those are also on Twitter.
Yeah, similar events. I go into the Las Vegas massacre, 9/11, some Jonestown stuff. That's all pinned at my Twitter account.
You have to come back. I got to find somebody to talk about what really happened in Vegas. That'll be another conversation. I mean, it was something weird, like where they were trying to kill MBS, right?
I don't know. Yeah, there's that whole thing. He was there apparently. But yeah, I went pretty far down the rabbit hole with that one. That's also still a mystery to me. But yeah,
I can't be Paddock, right? Because some people were shot from like a different angle. So there were other angles, like at a flat plane to the what is it, the cowboy music festival or whatever. But there's a lot of mysteries there.
There's
helicopters and weird stuff.
Yeah, and for anyone who's what's his name, McGowan fan, Program to Kill, Paddock just fits into this pattern, I would say. But there's a lot to look at with his life and with the event itself. So
interesting. Well, people can check that out on Twitter. But thanks so much for your time, and thanks for sharing this document. Again, it's Jim Garrison Keillor. I'll put a link to his Twitter, and it's the Sirhan timeline. So thanks so much for your time.
Thanks a lot. This was fun.
Cool. Yeah, great to talk with you. Stay there.